Few are taught the fundamentals of finance and money management in school. This limited series podcast tackles the basics all students need to know to become financially independent, made by students for students. On this episode, we talk about big tech and issues related to privacy and data collection, and we discuss the future of the individual's role in the economy. Welcome to episode 10 of the Money Class Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Money Class Podcast. My name is Kosta.
And this is Marc.
And today on the show, we have a pretty interesting episode. We're going to talk about a few things that we think are very relevant to today's world. We think it's going to be a huge chunk of... Well, we believe this is going to play... What we're going to talk about is going to have a big role in the future. That's what we think. And we just wanted to bring it up in one of our episodes. And I'm going to let Marc basically guide us through everything. So go ahead.
Perfect. So today's train, the first stop is going to be one that's very important, one that's gathered a lot of attention in the past few weeks. And, well, let's get into the backstory. So earlier today, while I was listening to my lectures on biology, yes, I am taking a biology class, one of my friends sent a message to our group chat, and she wrote, about this not too obvious, people are getting off Facebook using this new type of messaging software called Signal. And for those wondering, well, what is Signal? Well, Signal, Signal is pretty much a company that ensures encryption from the moment you send a message to the moment that the other person receives a message. And the big thing about that, the big important thing in Signal is the fact that it's not owned by an oligopoly or pretty much one of the big monopolies in the big tech space. And how did this gather attention? Well, a few weeks ago, Elon Musk shared a tweet, telling people use Signal. And when that happened, the stock of Signal surged 6,500%. Now, that was a different Signal. This Signal that surged was a telecommunication company out of Houston, Texas, that works on biomedicine and transportation, and defense markets, which has nothing to do with cybersecurity. But the actual Signal he was talking about was this type of messaging software. And why did he make this tweet? What pushed him to do this? Well, a big thing is during COVID, essentially any headline that was taken that would be put out to the internet would only last, an hour or 2 hours until there was a new headline from COVID. So that was an incredible opportunities for big companies, for big tech to start conglomerating some of their data, some of their processes, and really act almost like a monopoly inside a certain space, inside their space. And that's exactly what Facebook did. Facebook, which is the owner of Instagram, but also of WhatsApp. So they did was they're going to consolidate the back ends of Facebook Messenger and of WhatsApp. Now you may think, well, consolidating the back ends, that's good, right? Because that means that it's going to be quicker, there's going to be less interruptions, and that you'll be able to send and receive in a more efficient manner. But what that actually does mean is that now your folders, the folders they had on you, which used to be independent, are now merged. And what that means is that Facebook has so much more data that is accessible to them, which they could then use to sell to advertisers. Now, Kosta, would you want to explain kind of why they would sell advertisers and something that we've spoken about, free versus paid services, and then we'll get into why this could be a problem?
But before I do that, I just want to mention the big theme here. It's really about data collection and the theme of privacy. Now, the way it works, the way these companies make money, the way Facebook and basically any free company, the way they make money, is that instead of asking you to pay some money for them to just continue on working on their service, making it better, and just providing you with a great product, what they do is that they sell ads to their users. And the idea is that they'll give you the service for free and just put a bunch of ads on their platform, on their feeds, and that's how they make the money. The problem with that is that you become the product. So what they want to do is utilize a bunch of algorithms to always give you very relevant information, something you would really enjoy, something that would make you stay on their app longer, which essentially causes them to have more active users, more eyes on their platforms for longer periods of times, which means more ads, which also makes them gather more information on you, which makes them sell more relevant ads, and it's essentially an endless cycle of just basically extracting as much data as they can to make money through advertisers. So that's a very big issue, and that's something Signal. We're not sponsored by Signal. We just think it's a really great service with what they're doing. But that's what a platform like Signal is trying to do. It's trying to stop. I guess it's trying to do the very opposite of what Facebook is doing. They don't want to make you the product. They just want to provide you a great service. Considering they're a nonprofit organization, they have no pressure to basically be incentivized by money or by using you to capitalize on what they're doing. Yeah.
And the big problem with these advertisers is not the fact that they're targeting you. Now, I'm very pro target advertising for good use, right? If I'm looking to buy, if I'm in the market to buy a suit, let's say, and all of a sudden I start seeing ads for different suit companies, in Montreal, whether it be Suit Supply, whether it be Harry Rosen, whether it be, going to the Holtz, or even H&M, right? If I start seeing ads on my phone for suits, it's like, oh, perfect, this is exactly what I'm looking for. And sometimes you're leaving in a promo code, which I'm 100% for. The problem is that there's the other side of the coin. And that's, like you said, these social networks want to keep the users on this site as long as they can. So what do they put in front of you? They put sensational posts, sensational news, and stuff that may just be complete, completely irrelevant and completely false, because that's what keeps you on these websites so long, right? And that's where the problem lies, is that people that are getting their news and getting the information about the world on a site which is biased, and they're able to know how to buy what bias to use because they know you well. So if they know that you're a certain type of individual, of a certain age, of a certain sex, of a certain ethnicity, certain religious attachment, in that case, they're going to show you sensational news that you're going to be interested in, whether it be real, whether it be false. Well, whether it be real, and the problem lies when it's false. And that's kind of the big issue here, is because now that they're collecting so much data, they're able to feed you information that may not always be true, and that may completely skew your skew the way that you think.
Yeah, we've seen that a lot on social media, especially with what's been happening in politics, especially the last, I guess, month. They're banning certain politicians to just banning misinformation, because these companies are realizing how dangerous this can be. And they've kind of shot themselves in the foot, because what has incentivized them to make more money is also what's kind of ruining their platform at the same time. And something I've realized, and it's something I've told myself, is that capitalism has no moral guidance. Ethics kind of are, thrown out the window when the main thing is to just make money and be more productive and always create something better. So that's something to take into consideration. I think it's a really important issue. And there's so much to say about that, especially with ads. I think people have to realize that it's really easy for... Okay, think of it this way. When you're on Twitter and you like something, Twitter is, or at least the algorithms, are going to tell themselves that, okay, this person wants to see more content about that certain topic. So they're just going to start and pump out more content that's more relevant to that topic in your feed, regarding which of your followers actually is more keen to talk about that topic. And it just becomes a big cycle, almost like an echo chamber. It could be about a political opinion to, like, I don't know, you like Kit Kat, so it's going to show you more things related to chocolate or whatever,
Yeah.
And the issue
that's
is
a filter
that...
bubble. That's a filter bubble. Is that
Exactly.
You only see that, so you think that's the entire... That's the only thing that exists. You think the only chocolate available are Kit Kats, so now Kit Kat has a monopoly on your chocolate consumption.
Exactly. Or it could be the complete opposite. Maybe you are you really... I'll use politics because that's the big theme, but maybe you're a right-leaning person, and then Twitter, what they'll do is that they'll show you something very controversial from the other side, which will make you more furious and will use your anger, that emotion, to make you tweet more about it and be more active on their platform. But I just want to go back to the whole issue on ads. You talked about targeted ads and personalized ads. I think that's a very dangerous thing. I think you're right. There's a lot of good in that area. Like, obviously, if it's done well, it could be very beneficial for both parties, both the social media and for the user. But there's this kind of like downward spiral where essentially the more ads that are targeted, the more the company knows about you, the more ads that they target to you, the more they learn about you, it becomes very easy for them to basically control how you think and what you do and what you buy. So when you think you're very independent, you might think you're very independent, but at the end of the day, they're just going to know so much about you that they're going to know how to deliver something to you to make you act on it. So you're kind of losing control in that sense. Am I making sense there?
Yeah, but it's like if you go to the library and you only see books from certain authors, and it can you know the library is essentially controlling what you see and what you think is available. So now your pool of what you're actually picking is biased.
Yeah, exactly.
It,
It's a very big issue, and control is a very big privacy and control. Those are things that kind of are meshed together nowadays, and I think for the next few decades.
yeah. Yeah, and you know the reason why we're able to have these false advertising and also these filter bubbles, which sometimes may be false, is because of Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act, which is pretty much an act that was passed in the 1990s in the U.S., which allowed essentially which meant that communication providers were no longer liable for the content that were on their websites. So before that, it would be like if I post something on Facebook, all of a sudden my telecommunication provider and Facebook are liable for what I said. But that act eliminated that, meaning that you could post something and you know these companies wouldn't be liable, because we know that if that happened, they would all go bankrupt because they would be getting sued left and right. Because sometimes free speech, you know, inhibits the other person, right? So that's why this section was erected in order to allow the internet to flourish. But unfortunately, it had that negative impact where they were no longer moderating, or they no longer had a duty to moderate what was on their websites. And in terms of privacy, I know that, you know, Kosta, you go on incognito mode, you go on, you know, you have your cookies turned off. I don't have those because I like the target advertising, but is there something that, you know, I know you have an opinion that's very differing. When did you really start doing that, and did you see like a shift in the way that the ads that you were presented on your screens?
Well, a big issue for me was, especially I think mostly during I guess since the start of the pandemic, because we were more inside, I started using technology a lot more. I was always on in front of a screen, and I started monitoring, I guess, how I would use that technology and like what process I would use, if that's making any sense. And what came to be, or what at least I realized, was that, and especially from reading a lot of articles, getting into someone like Edward Snowden, but also trying to see what the opposite view of I guess anti-privacy people had to say versus privacy people had to say. I just realized that it was a very dangerous thing, and that although it may be harmless right now, I think in the future it's going to be very, very controlling and dangerous, and it's kind of become almost like it's weird to say it, but it's almost become like an authoritarian thing where like big tech is just going to be able to control you. And I know it sounds like very much like I'm a conspiracy theorist right now, but that's not what I'm trying to say. I just think it's very important to be in control of like what you are sharing with the world, right? A big quote I wanted to mention, because you did mention free speech, and it really depends on how people view free speech for themselves, but Edward Snowden said, and it's a very famous quote, arguing that you don't care about the right to privacy because you have nothing to hide is no different than saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. And it's something I really considered. And for me personally, we can pause on that. Do you have something to say, Mark?
No, I was trying to wrap my head around that, around the quote.
Yeah, I'll repeat it just for the listeners. Yes. Arguing that you don't care about the right to privacy because you have nothing to hide is no different than saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. And then he says, when you say I have nothing to hide, you're saying I don't care about this right. So Edward Snowden is essentially characterizing privacy as a right. Yeah.
It's okay. It's like if you didn't have walls around your house, and it's supposed to having walls. You just have windows, and anyone could kind of look through your home. I have nothing to hide in my house necessarily, but I don't want people to peek in. But the thing is, that's a physical barrier versus the internet one, which is a virtual barrier, which we don't necessarily see, but still impacts us.
Yeah, well, you think of now. I'm thinking of even the Google Homes or the Alexas or the Siris, all of that stuff. If you think about it, they're listening to you, and it's you might think I'm a conspiracy theorist when I say that, but actually, something I've done is that just to go back on like how I got control back of my data and like what I did during the pandemic. I asked Google, Facebook, Amazon, all of these companies to send me data files of all the data they've ever accumulated through my account of myself. And everybody can do that on their accounts. There's a little button you can request to get all your data shared. And what was crazy is that a company like Google had like close to 30 gigabytes of data on myself. And they made me download a 30 gigabyte file. And it was crazy because in that file, because I do have a Google Home, which I'm getting rid of in a bit. I ordered like another one that's a lot more privacy specific. But anyways, they had recorded... Well, kind of, yeah. Well, like, yeah, I still want to have like a voice activated thing, but I don't want it to be from one of those companies because they already have so much information from me.
Fair.
But yeah, what happened with Google is that I opened all of these files they had of me, and some of them were straight up speeches of me asking Google questions through their voice links, and I could hear myself from a year ago being like, "Hey Google, what's I don't know, Cristiano Ronaldo's birthday?" And that was there, and I was like, "What? That's so random." I didn't even remember. I even asked.
It was like an MP3 file.
Yeah, MP3 file. They had all of my Google Drive data all backed up, and you can open it. Anybody with that link could open the my information from my Google Drive. Same thing with Facebook. They had a bunch of information on me. What was interesting was that before turning off personalized ads on Google, what I found was them having a big list of assumptions about me. That I'm an 18 to 24 person who likes hockey, who likes this, who likes that. And they were able to create a big profile of who I was to personalize ads and target them to me so I can be more, so it can be easier for me to click on them and make them more money. And, that was the big spiral and the big realization for me that kind of caused me to stop sharing as much data as I can with these companies. And, there was a lot of slack that was given to big tech because of this issue. And what they did, or at least what they're trying to do now, is to be more transparent about how they use your data. So they're still going to continue to use your data, and they're still going to continue to mine all of that information, but they're going to tell you how they're doing it. So now when you go on your Facebook or on your Google or even on your Amazon account, you can click on a privacy and security section in the settings, and you can see what they're doing. And you can turn off and on stuff that are very on and off things in your account that are very specific to
but by
whatever
default
service
it's probably all on by default, right?
Yeah, well, it usually it's on by default. Sometimes you can, like, when you make your account, you can choose to turn things on or off. But yeah, by default, most of it is on. I suggest people just go and like just look at what they're sharing, or at least download some of their files to see what these companies already have from you, because it can be very scary when a company has 30 gigabytes about what you know, about who you are, and they know that. But yeah, what were you going to say, Marc?
No, but by default it's on. It's like a few years ago there was in Canada, or one country after the other, plus the European Union, they were passing these laws on email. What is it when you send when you receive a mass email? Anyways,
spam.
Yeah, like, well, spam is the spam email you don't like. But anyways, newsletters. Sorry. So by default, whenever you make an account, you would always have the newsletter that was checked, and all of a sudden they passed this law where by default it would no longer be checked and it would now be unchecked. And I think that's something that maybe we're going to be getting towards for these advertisers, where if you want, you can opt in, but it's not a default you must opt out. It's a default you must opt in. And I think that can be something interesting. But who knows how much this is going to impact the business models of these companies and how they're going to have to pivot in order to stay relevant.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, I know in the European countries, or at least the European Union or the EU, whoever takes control of this branch of the government, they're a lot more strict on like how data is, who controls data and like what companies can do with that data. I know companies like Facebook have been charged large amounts of fines because they were basically sketchy with how they used the European population's data. And I know countries like the United States it's taking a lot longer for them to realize, or at least they're starting to question the individuals in power in big tech. But the issue with that is that you start to realize that maybe in governance you need to know a lot about the tech companies to understand what they're doing to you. Is that making any sense?
Yeah. So, and the problem is that these governments made these laws in 20, 30 years ago, when there were these communication laws about the internet, a time where there wasn't these big monopolies or pretty much these big companies on the market. So the laws itself are outdated, and the problem is, and the problem is that there are regulators that want to come in and they want to change it, but people aren't voting enough to say this is what I want in terms of data privacy, and also there's a lot of lobbyists that are paid very 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 good amounts in order to go and persuade different elected officials that let's keep it the way it is, let's have these 30-year-old laws, and let's not change, because that's pretty much how these companies are. It's not a loophole because it's completely legal and it's completely evident, but that's how they're able to proliferate and grow so much, just because they have the green light. And it's the government. I'm not going to put the blame on the government or different agencies, but they are the ones who are responsible for ensuring people's privacy and ensuring that these big tech companies aren't acting like a monopoly in the entire space. A great example is Apple. Apple, since they released the App Store in 2009, I think, because 2007 was the iPhone. I think 2 years later the App Store came out. They take 30% of any purchases from the App Store. And with that, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but if you go on Netflix on the iPhone, you cannot subscribe to a Netflix account on your phone, because if you do it through the iPhone or an iPad, then Apple would essentially be getting 30% of the $10 a month that you spend. So they're essentially acting like a monopoly, which is 30% is a pretty substantial amount on every single transaction on the App Store.
Yeah, it's not just the money you pay through the App Store. That it's also the fact that company like Apple, because a lot of people use Apple's hardware like the iPhone or the MacBook, what happens is that they have control over that information, but also over I guess what subscription services are available to you as a customer, right?
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of lawsuits again from I think Spotify or a lot of companies like that. I know Fortnite, that company sued Apple because Apple removed Fortnite from his App Store or something like that. So there's been a lot of lawsuits because people don't know what to do about this issue. Is it an issue? How do we work around it? There's so many things that people are not sure about yet because people are either not informed at all or don't understand the space. And you're saying you don't want to blame politicians, and I don't want to come in here and make this political, but I think it's also subject to realize that I read somewhere that less than 5% of everybody of the governing powers in politics, whether it be senators, the House people. I'm talking about the U.S. because that's where these companies are at, big tech. Only less than 5% are specialists in tech. The rest come from public service, whether it be coming just straight from nonprofit organization to a political background. So I think it's just lack of information. And that's going to change with time. The more our generation grows up, and we're the ones that are slowly taking control of, the countries and politics in general, because we're more keen and aware about this stuff because we grow up with it.
It's going to be interesting to see how we shift the way that our countries are run and how our corporations are run as our generation ages. I think it's going to be very interesting to see that because I don't know the average age of people in politics, but I have a feeling it's a bit more than 18 to 24.
Just a bit.
Just maybe 2 or 3 times.
Double that
times.
and
Maybe
add a few more years.
I think it's triple that. But Joe Biden is 78 years old. How old is Joe Biden?
I think so.
Let me go a little quick Google search, but I think he's about. He's not a young fella. He's he's a good chap, but 78. Yeah. That's a different. He was born during the in the midst of the Second World War. It's just a bit, and that's not to degrade him. That's not to bring down what he's accomplished and what he's, what we hope he's going to accomplish, as the president elect. But it just shows you how there's such an age gap between us who are born into and who use technology on a daily, if not hourly, minute by minute basis, and people who are who learned about it later in life. It's gonna be interesting to see.
Well, it's You've read a lot from Scott Galloway. I've recommended you that author. Scott Galloway, he's an NYU professor for those listening. And he talks a lot about how it's crazy how we have... Yeah, that's his book, Post-Corona. We're going to actually talk about that on a later episode, so stay tuned, guys.
Yeah.
Scott Galloway said it's crazy how we have government... the people who are controlling government are in their 70s, whereas the people who are controlling big tech and the media and all of that stuff are 35-year-olds who live in San Francisco and have nose piercing. He said a very funny quote like that. And it's just a big contrast right there. And I'm not degrading or like trying to disrespect either or, but it's just something to keep in mind. And people can make their own conclusions off of that.
Yeah. But that's a divide between kind of the new individuals and the more legacy institutions that have been running that have been such a big part of our lives. And it seems like there is more and more of a divide between individuals like ourselves and institutions who for whom a lot of people for whom they pretty much have a status quo, right? And it seems like there's now becoming a disconnect between what we want as individuals and what these institutions are preaching. So I think, Kosta, that's a good time to bring up a little tweet that from yours truly, Naval. When did he tweet this? And we'll dive into this in just a second.
So Naval, our great Naval, who had all the tweets that we talked about in 2 of our previous episodes, he tweeted this on January 2, 2021. Bitcoin is an exit from the Fed. DeFi, which is decentralized finance, is an exit from Wall Street. Social media is an exit from mass media. Homeschooling is an exit from industrial education. Remote work is an exit from 9 to 5. Creator economy is an exit from employment. Individuals are leaving institutions. And this tweet has 60,000 likes and close to 15,000 retweets.
So what we could do is we can go through it line by line, and quickly, sure. Maybe say 1 or 2 words about it, and then we could kind of get our general understanding or general opinion as to what it's trying to say. So the first one I think is quite obvious. Last week we had Kate Stapleton, which is an expert in Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and everything in terms of even a bit of DeFi. I think we spoke about that briefly. But the first one, Bitcoin is an exit from the Fed, and that's very I think that's very evident, and that's a big push of Bitcoin, is that it's not being regulated by a federal administration, by a federal board, by the government, by governments, by different money printing agencies, governments, and that people want that. People are longing for a way to exchange money in a way that's disconnected from the government agencies. And I think it's a bit hard to disagree from that. Kosta, do you want to complete that and then go to the next one?
Yeah, for me, Bitcoin is. We had Kate on the show last week, and exactly what you just said. But it's also the fact that I see Bitcoin as being anti-government, and exactly, Naval is saying it's an exit from the Fed. And a lot of people, what they're doing is that they're just putting 5 or 10% of their money in Bitcoin, because they're saying, if for whatever reason my government fails and like everything collapses, like in Venezuela, at least I'm gonna have some Bitcoin for me to just be able to survive for whatever case and reason. And we talked about how countries like Greece were kind of trying to do that, and we gave the example of Somalia and Venezuela, but it's just something to take into consideration, and that's what Naval's trying to say here.
Yeah, because if ever the government makes decisions that lead to hyperinflation, or there's some, whether it be trade wars, trade barriers, taxes, regulations which inhibit the flow of money, or that encourage it a bit too much, or just the printing of the money in order to pay down debts or pay for jets or private islands. In that case, you're exiting these government institutions, which has pros and cons, but I think that's a pretty easy statement to agree with.
Yeah, the chances of the government completely failing as a system is, I think, very far away or very unlikely anytime in the near future, or maybe even in our lifetimes. But it's just something to keep in mind, that if it ever does, there are solutions to that problem, like Bitcoin.
Yeah, and interest rates and government borrowing rates are exactly that. It's the risk. An interest rate is the risk that you're going to default on your payments, right? So if you have a 2% rate on a loan, that means that 1 in 50 chance the person with the same profile as you is going to default, is going to stop paying on their loans. Well, if the government 30-year rate is 0.2%, Well, you're saying you have a lot of confidence in the government that that's not going to default, and you have a lot of confidence that it's going to be stable, or that we have a stable outlook for our economy. So that kind of tying it in with our with our money class when we talk about interest rates, because
Yeah.
because it's a what are the odds of Greece failing? Well, quite high. Their lending rates are not the same as other
Yeah.
European Union countries, and but they have a currency which is the same, which is part of the issue that they were presented with.
Actually, before we move on to the next point on that tweet, for those who are really interested in learning about everything Mark just spoke about, I highly recommend you look at the Greek economy and study what happened between, I guess, 2008 all the way until like 2015-16. There's a lot to say about that issue and how things can get pretty much how things can mess up in a country that was doing relatively well. It's like I think it's a class of its own. It's like a university class of its own. But with that, DeFi is an exit from
Next.
Wall Street. What do you think of that? I'll let you talk first.
Well, what is DeFi exactly?
Decentralized finance. So I'll give it the proper definition because I feel like I'm going to butcher it.
I guess something like
DeFi,
crowdfunding and go ahead.
DeFi is an experimental form of finance that does not rely on central and financial intermediaries such as brokerages, exchanges, or banks, and instead utilizes smart contracts on blockchains, the most common being Ethereum. Did that make any sense? Also, by the way, do you know what DeFi is?
Not too much, no.
Okay. DeFi is basically you use how I've come to understand it. DeFi, you're using cryptocurrencies like it could be Ethereum, but it could just be any type of crypto where you use that to make money by kind of like lending it for people to use it to invest in companies to give you a return. And the way it's decentralized, it's because, well, you're not using your cash to give it to companies to do that through the stock market or through like venture capitalism, through a private investor or like a loan through the bank. It's just all done through cryptocurrencies. And there are a lot of companies who do that right now, and they give crazy amounts of basically their higher interest on a savings account. It can be like 8% interest paid annually on your Bitcoin. So yeah, it's crazy stuff like that. And he's just saying it's different because it's not regulated by the government. So yeah.
Well, I think regulation.
Do you have anything to add?
I think the regulation in this space isn't something that's bad. It ensures that the companies in which you are investing in are actually good companies, if of course the due diligence is done correctly. But brokerages also facilitate transactions and match the buyers, the ones who have money and the ones who need money. So I'm not sure how much blockchain is how it's applied and how easy it is in order to find how to match these people. But Wall Street is a great facilitator for that. Or investment bankers that bring companies public. As good as by doing so, you open up the broad your company to funding in the public markets in huge amounts that would otherwise be unavailable in the private markets. Maybe blockchain allows that as well. Again, I don't know enough about it, but I still see Wall Street as important because a company wants to go public, wants to raise $100 million or $500 million or whatever they want for their IPO. They may not know how to do it correctly. They may not know how much to price their companies for, their shares for. So then, Wall Street has a place there. And, even in the investment world, I want to invest my money. Yeah, okay, blockchain is a great way of doing it, but what are the companies that are available right now to invest in through that? And then what are the opportunities or what are the companies that are available in the masses, through Wall Street or through the other exchanges? So I see a merit for the traditional investment world, but maybe I'll be wrong in 5 or 10 years, and I wouldn't mind being wrong.
A good example I want to use to kind of like compare it to, I don't know if you've heard of SPACs. So it's essentially funds where you give the money to, like, I guess an investor, and it could be through the stock market, and they take your money without giving you too much information on how it's being used, but they reinvest it into startups and companies they believe in, and then give you the return. And the benefit is that think of it this way. So like I'm trying to think of an example. Think of Coinbase. I'm just using that as an example because they're about to go public and it's a private company at the moment. Coinbase, for the last few years that it's been a private company, it's been basically raising money through private investors, right? And it's usually a lot of millionaires who have access to these contacts where they can be put on a phone call with the finance people at Coinbase, who will then ask them to give them money and a certain stake in the company, right? Early on in the stage of its development. And then later on, the company goes in the public market once it has a certain valuation based on what the banks think and what investors think. And that's how people like us can go ahead and invest in that company because it's in the stock market, right? But what SPACs are trying to do is getting people like us, everyday individuals, to finance these companies early on in the stage where they're still kind of like private in a way, I guess. And through that, you make your money earlier than just waiting for it to go public. DeFi is kind of sort of like that. And that's why there are crazy amounts of returns. But also you have to realize that you're not getting a lot of information through this process. And that because it's not regulated, because it's not certain, you might just lose everything. And I know... a lot of companies who do this stuff where they give you high interest on, for example, your Bitcoin or your Ethereum, they put it in their contracts. Like when you sign, when it says, I'm giving you 6% return on your Bitcoin or 8% return on your Bitcoin, there's a chance that I won't be able to give it back to you. Maybe if something messes up. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's something I just kind of wanted to bring up.
Yeah, no, good point. That's a great point. And there's always going to be a risk. But, if DeFi is a way of investing as well, in that case, for all intents and purposes, then go ahead. Why? If it brings good, if it allows investors and companies in order to grow, allows people to make returns and allows companies to raise money. In that case, I see DeFi as having a merit. Now, is it going to completely replace Wall Street? Maybe not in the next few decades. Maybe in 200 years, if this podcast lasts that long on the platforms, maybe. But I don't see it, in the next 50 years, let's say, or maybe 50 years is a bit long, but maybe the next 20 years, I have a difficulty seeing it completely replacing Wall Street.
It has a long way to go for sure.
The next one, social media is an exit from mass media. And now, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm really big on the creator economy. A big thing I used to specialize a lot in, I still do, but to a lesser extent, is I guess media and entertainment and how technology kind of cooperates with that world. I'm mostly thinking of Hollywood, but also what Netflix and Disney is doing right now, or even to a bigger extent, companies like YouTube or the video game industry. But social media is an exit from mass media. So I'll give the example of what was happening in Hollywood with TV studios and movie studios. For you in the 1930s, 50s, 60s, 70s, all the way to like, I guess, 2010, 2015, a large part, the only way you can get your screenplay to get funded and to be put, I guess, to be released to the public is by trying to get your foot in the door at a company like Paramount Pictures or Warner Brothers, where they would hear your pitch, like it enough for them to give you a few dollars for you to go produce it and, go through the entire system of finding agents and finding contractors and doing, it's the big process, right? And the only way it would release in the market is that it would go to theaters. They would, companies, studios would make a big premium on the movie and try and get the budget back, and then hopefully make more money through DVDs and Blu-rays and, iTunes sales. And that's how it would work. TV studios from the 1950s onwards, what they tried to do, or what they were doing, was that, there would be a few channels on TV. They would show you, their productions, whether it be a TV show or like something like a Johnny Carson, or today it's like mostly Jimmy Fallon or, late night shows like that. And in between they would put ads, right? And ads would be their way of making money. And so think of TV's purpose was to sell you ads, and the way they did that was by creating engaging content for you to sit through the ads, right?
Okay, yeah.
Am I making sense so far? Are you following? Great.
Yeah.
So
TV was made so that you watch the ads. It's pretty much what
exactly.
You're saying.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
So these were the only ways for you to get your shows out, or to be creative, quote unquote, by having these studios control the distribution. That's the key word here. What happened now with social media and mass media is that people are leaving these institutions because it's becoming increasingly easier for people to create content for audience members. You don't have to rent the $300,000 IMAX camera anymore that only a studio can do or a private funder can do. Where you can buy a $1,000 camera that does 90% of what the $300,000 camera does, because most people will watch your content on a computer or an iPhone. So there barely is that big of a difference. So you have companies like YouTube who come in and essentially democratize the creative sector. And that's a way that you're exiting from mass media, because by making that happen, everybody starts creating. Everybody creates about their personal interests. So content is becoming more and more niche because it doesn't have to provide to the masses anymore. So instead of having to always sit down and talk about and listen to mass media, whether it be the new CNN or a movie that's trying to appeal to everybody so it can get more eyeballs on the screen, now you can literally Google a specific topic that's very niche that only you enjoy, and you'll listen to the person who's an expert in that field. So that's why it's becoming an exit, because it makes more sense for you to spend time doing exactly what you want instead of listening to something that's made for everyone. Because when you're making something for everyone, no one's going to hear you because it's not niche enough. That was a big speech. I hope all of that makes sense.
It makes sense, and I think the main takeaway here is that social media is democratizing content creation. It's increasing the amount of choice that you have in terms of, or at least your perceived choice as to what you have in terms of entertainment. And as a result, people are exiting mass media, so TVs and movies, and people aren't saying, I want to become an actor. They're saying, I want to become a TikToker or a YouTuber, because that's seen as like what's hot. And just, ask any 8-year-old kid what they want to be when they grow up. They're not going to say most of them are probably going to say, I want to become like my favorite YouTuber. Because they're able to serve a niche content, and they serve that niche content, they make niche content and they serve a niche audience very well, which mass media isn't able to do, unfortunately.
Well, I just want to point out, there have been very successful shifts I'm thinking of late night show hosts, right? Jimmy Fallon or Stephen Colbert, although they're on TV and that's like the prime way they deliver their content, because CNBC or I think NBC, these companies own their shows, or CBS, something like that. They still moved their content to YouTube for people to watch and to still keep eyeballs and make ad money, right? But I'm thinking personally as a 21-year-old right here, like I barely watch like the news channel on my TV. What I do now is that to get my news,
actually watch it?
No, I go on Twitter and just see what people are talking about and try and find different perspectives. And then maybe I'll go on the New York Times website and see what they're talking about. And that's how I get my news. I don't just open my TV and see what people are saying. That's like a thing of the past. Like my mom and dad does that, and I don't think our generation is going to be doing that. So yeah, it goes beyond just the TikTokers and the Viners. It goes to even how I think it's going to be the next CNN, I think, is going to be some random person in the state of like Illinois who just happened to pick up a camera and just record themselves talking about the news. And that may lead that person to create a big media empire where they put everything on YouTube, and it's just another alternative to CNN, but they're doing it through their lens.
Well, I think Philip DeFranco did it a few years ago, and it was Trevor Nolan with the Daily Show.
I forget the names, but I know.
Oh my god, I forget his name, but you know the Daily Show. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you're talking about. And Philip DeFranco, which I think was a pioneer in news online. I started watching him. I was like, what, 10 years ago, probably 10, 12 years ago when he started making his shows, his YouTube videos, and it's the news in a way that's presented, which I like, without being sensational, and without it always being bad news like what you see on TV. Okay, next one. Homeschooling is an exit from industrial education.
I'll let you go first.
So I see a pro and a con here. Well, that's nice. Isn't that a deep conversation? Industrial education, there's a pro and a con to having everyone kind of learn the same thing. The base that, let's look at all the way until let's take the angle of all the way until the end of high school, because homeschooling isn't really applicable to university. But let's take the K through 12, okay, or K through 11 in Quebec, and essentially, when everyone learns a certain base knowledge, we ensure that everyone has a certain understanding of how society works, how science works, how math works, how literature, how you can interpret it. And I see that as a very nice pro. The con is, if things are taken out of the curriculum, in that case, everyone lacks a certain knowledge. And I see big problems. Financial literacy is one. Entrepreneurship, which kind of goes into that. There was a class in Quebec. I always forget the name. But it was, how to screw in, how to change a light bulb, how to sew, how to cook, all these, all these good things that you should learn, which are taken out of the educational system because they said, well, this is a place to learn about wars and about history and about Pythagorean theory, and not about, how to build a little shed, right? And I think that was a bad shift, and we're sort of going back to that idea because now financial literacy is now in every single 11th grade classroom in Quebec. Sex education starts from kindergarten all the way until secondary 5, so until 11th grade. So we're going back to what we were before, but that means that there was a generation, including our, where I think we were the last ones in that, us being 21, 22 years old. That lacked that education, and homeschooling would have been a great alternative to fill those gaps. But I think there's so many important aspects to normal schooling, whether it be the social, the sports, the development of your brain outside of just the actual classwork, which has a big merit. So all that to say, I think in industrial education, I see it very good. But homeschooling is something that your parents could teach you. Hopefully your parents have time and have the knowledge to teach you how to change a light bulb and how to open a checking or savings account.
Well, I want to take that a different route, actually. I believe homeschooling and industrial education kind of have to work together.
Well, yeah, exactly. Your parents are homeschooling you, are teaching you certain things, but the industrial education it teaches you about the war of La Guerre de Troyes and other notable events.
Yeah, yeah. But the way I see it more as like I think kids need a certain structure all the way until a certain age, where they kind of have to start becoming more independent as they learn about as they transition to the world and less being dependent on their parents and just the institutions. What I mean by that is say a kid should be maybe in an institution like a school from kindergarten all the way to high school. And then instead of doing something like university or CEGEP, which is technically the early stages of university in Quebec, it can be very beneficial for that kid to just stay at home, get homeschooled by learning about things they just want to learn through online platforms and through doing internships and just learning by doing. I really hate it a lot of the times when I'm in a university course and I kind of have to take it because it's mandatory, because I need to get that elective to be able to take another course, and it just becomes this endless cycle of obligations. And I've realized a lot of the times is that when a teacher assigns a book to us, I'm less likely to appreciate it compared to me just actively looking for books I really enjoy on subjects I enjoy, right? And I think it's more of a psychological thing, because sometimes there are books where I'm confident if I had just found this on my own by going to the bookstore and buying it, I would have enjoyed it more because it was more of an independent choice, right? And I think what has happened the last year, at least for me, is that I've had a lot more time on my hands and a lot more freedom to just learn things on my own while also doing school. And I realized, funny enough, that I learned more doing it by myself than through my classes. Which is kind of scary
because it's your own choice.
But yeah,
see, that's the thing. Humans, we want to have the illusion that we have a choice. It's funny. I was reading the post-corona, and oh my god, I sent it to a friend who was studying marketing, and pretty much what it was said was humans don't want to be given more choices. They want to be given more confidence in the choices that they make.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what you're saying about the book, is that you want to be the one making the decision of reading the book, regardless of what the book actually was.
Exactly. Actually, I have the quote right here. Let me just grab it because I remember noting it down.
I think it was that.
Uh, so it's rookie marketers think people want choice. Consumers don't want more choice, but more confidence in the
Confidence.
choices presented. Choice
Exactly.
is a tax on time and attention. Customers want someone else to do the research and curate the options for them.
Mm-hmm.
That's the quote. So
Exactly.
exactly what you just said.
Perfect. Perfect. So I think we're relatively and on in the same line with homeschooling. Now I see a certain structure as important. I see as a certain base amount of knowledge everyone has as important. Um, I've got a good friend of mine who left. He was doing his post secondary education. He left, and now he's working in in construction, working in woodworking. He's using the Pythagorean theorem, right? The
Hmm.
how to calculate the angles in a triangle, something that you learn in seventh, eighth grade. You never thought you would be using it in your life, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, if I want to be able to do these, the perfect corners in my in the house, in the room, or whatever I'm building, you have to have your angles spot on.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
maybe you said homeschooling, it's not important, you look at it quickly, but this industrial education allowed us to have a base knowledge, which benefits, I think, us for the better. So next one, remote work is an exit from 9 to 5.
Um, I mean, that's pretty evident if you look at the last year. Again, I see the last year, and a lot of the business professors, like Scott Galloway says this, it's showed us it's just been an accelerant.
Yeah.
What has happened in 2020 and 2021, or will happen, continue to happen in 2021, is that what is the things that are happening now are things that were supposed to happen in 2025 or 2030, but they're just happening now because we were able to shift through, the pandemic and everything that has made us have to shift our behaviors, right?
Hmm.
There's an example that Apple, it took them like I think 30, 40, 50 years to get the first $1 trillion valuation, but after that it took them only like 8 months to get to $2 trillion. So it shows
Yeah.
you the how accelerants have been working lately. But um, with that being said, because we were forced to work from home, a lot of people realize they don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money on rent in downtown Manhattan, so they can go to work in a really shitty office in a Manhattan building and just make crazy amounts of money, but also have to pay crazy amounts of taxes and crazy amounts of maintenance to be there. Maybe you could just live in your hometown in whatever state you're
And
in
still do
or
the same
whatever
job. Yeah.
province you're in and do the same job.
The problem with remote work is that a lot of people aren't able to stop working. They don't know when the day starts, don't know where the day ends, and you do your where you're doing your work from the kitchen, but your kitchen is also where you eat, where you relax. It all kind of mashes together, and we're kind of in an awkward teething stage where we're not sure when we start and when we end. Before 9 to 5 is very easy. You wake up, you get to work, 5 o'clock, that's it, right? You go, assuming that that's the type of job that you had, right? So that's what 9 to 5 allowed, was a disconnect, was a time to say I'm done. But remote work is that, it's 5 o'clock, I can work until 5:15, 5:30, 6 o'clock. All of a sudden an hour go by. All of a sudden it's 9 o'clock at night. So your work essentially is taking over a lot of the time that we used to have for our relaxing activities, for activities that we wanted. Um, so I think it's just a transition period that we're in now until we are able to say I'm done for the day. At a time that you don't, at a time where your coworkers aren't going to be looking down on you and saying, "Oh, what are you doing? Already stopping."
Yeah, but I think the big thing though is just it depends of who you are. Like you said, like I think a mother appreciates the fact that she doesn't have to drive 30 minutes to 60 minutes in traffic to get to her job in downtown
Yeah,
Montreal and gets to spend that extra time at home, right?
yeah,
But I think people like us who are very young, who want to be around people, who want to be in an environment where we can just like connect, right? That's
hmm,
very important. And I think we're going to see a huge amount of young people going towards the cities and a huge amount of adults who have responsibilities greater than their job to go ahead and stay at home and do things more remotely. Or we're going to see some sort of like joint thing where maybe it's like 3 days a week you're in the office, 2 days a week you're at home, right?
yeah. It's gonna be interesting to see where we go in the future. But I'm a very social person. I enjoy the social interaction. I think it's important for career development, for if we're thinking creatively, I have a hard time seeing remote work as the only option or as the only part of our work, but I definitely see it as a big part of the future workplace. Okay, so we've got two last tweets from Naval, two last parts of his tweet rather, and the second to last is creator economy is an exit from employment. Now, I'm gonna give my spiel quickly, keep it under a minute, and I'll have you rebuttal because I know you're much more in creator. I know you're much more into this than you might. And then we can actually do a full podcast on creating brands. Actually, now that I think about it,
That could be an episode. Yeah.
that should be an episode. But we'll take a note. But not everyone is creative. Not everyone knows how to work their cameras and do the editing, or not everyone is interested in doing so. So to say that the creative economy is a complete, or that everyone in employment is going to venture towards creator economy, I think is a bit naive. But to say that some people are going to exit the employment route and work for themselves, whether it be as consultants, whether it be as freelancers, or just working for themselves, or putting content out that just for them, I think that's a very possible opportunity. And again, social media and the internet has allowed us to do this. It's just that the bifurcation between creators and employees, I think, is going to be even greater, because we're going to be able to see the polar extremes. But there's more of a spectrum, I think, that can be created, where you're working your 9 to 5, but you're also building your brand at the same time. That's kind of all I have to say about that.
So creator economy is an exit from employment. Creator economy is, I think the word is kind of implies something that it's not. Creator economy is not about being creative. Creator economy is about sharing whatever you do without, it doesn't necessarily have to be creative. It could not be creative at all, but just sharing it with the masses. Everybody has a camera on their iPhone. It's very simple for someone to just start filming themselves talking to the camera and then posting that on the internet, having no editing, and just, granted the quality is bad, but at least you're able to get your information out there. And then with time, I think what can happen, especially us in our age, we can learn that being creative, learning about editing, learning about how to control audio through making a podcast, all of these things are skills you can develop. Creativity isn't about trying to be like the next Picasso all the time. Creativity can just be about how you can use a tool to get your message out. And that's something I've realized early on. I went to film school, and it was something I was, I'm still kind of considering maybe doing a film one day, or doing documentaries, but it's I realize how important it is as a skill to be able to just market yourself. Whether it be even small things, I hear YouTubers say this. Imagine you're a doctor. I know this guy Ali Abdal on YouTube. He's a doctor, but he also understands graphic design and filming. So when he goes at doctor conferences and he knows how to make a PowerPoint just simply look good, what happens is that it's just more appealing and pleasing during his presentations, when it's all just seamlessly works together and it's beautiful. So when he talks, it just it makes the feeling or the process better for people, right? It's like when you film yourself on a camera and you're talking to the camera and you post that on YouTube, it might be shitty quality and people might not watch it because it looks like it was filmed on a potato. But then the better you get at it and the more engaged you can get through your video by putting pictures and little graphics and whatever, people will stay through your message and you can impact more people. Am I making sense so far? I feel like I'm going all over the place.
No one asked Picasso what brush he was using to make his. No one was asking Van Gogh what brush he was using in order to do his paintings. They just admired the work that was being done. And I think we're so caught up in this. Oh, what's your camera? What's your gear? Thinking that that's going to make the difference in the content that you're creating. At the end of the day, it's the message that you're bringing out, and it's the quality of what you're able to produce with what you currently have.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to realize, especially because this podcast is made for students. Students need to understand how important creating a brand about themselves will be, or about anything they start in their lives. I think entrepreneurship is going to be a lot more prominent in our generation, because there's going to be, I think, a lot less. Institutions are going to be a lot more rare, because the bigger ones are going to be getting a huge size of the pot as we go along. And I think people are, especially our generation, we see it as I want to work at Apple, or I want to work at I don't know, Bridgewater Associates, like these big companies, because they're like, everybody knows them and they're really big and it's just like cool. And how am I going to put this? Everybody wants to work at Apple because it's appealing, right? But the thing is, when you go to Apple and you realize that although it's very fun to work on the iOS software, you have a smaller role because you're a smaller person in a big pot. When you become a creator and you create your own brand and you start talking about the things you like, and you have independence and complete control of what you do, and you can make passive income because what you create is out into the world even while you sleep, you start realizing how much more appealing that can be the older you get. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I wanted to say about brand strategy and creator economy.
Yeah, it allows you to reach a broader audience and make and have other streams of income which aren't necessarily a 1-for-1 with the amount of time that you put in it. It could be a 1 to a million or a million to 1.
Pretty much.
And I guess the last line is individuals are leaving institutions. I think that ties in exactly what you just said of how big institutions, or at least big tech or big companies, are going to have more and more a big piece of the pie. And they're going to acquire other companies, and it's really pretty much going to be big conglomerates unless government and federal agencies come in and break them up, which is kind of what they're trying to do with Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and everything else. But it's the Malcolm Gladwell metaphor of the big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a big pond. And many people don't want to be the small fish in the big pond. They'd rather be a big fish in a small pond and be able to be more creative, be able to have more say on their schedule, be able to have more of an impact on the work on what they're creating. And that's kind of going to lead to individuals leaving institutions. But I think institutions are always going to have a place in our economy, in our entire, in our capitalistic culture, in our capitalistic economy, because there is certain need for the high productivity, incredible margins and low costs that these institutions allow many people to benefit from. So that's kind of the way I see individuals leaving institutions. I don't see it as a complete, end all be all. That's not going to be anything. It's not going to be in the future. I think it's going to be less important and it's going to be less put up on a pedestal. But I still think there's going to be an important aspect or a good amount of people working for big institutions.
No, I agree. I think it's going to be like interdependence. They both kind of work together, and they both they're both going to be, one's existence kind of justifies the other's existence. I think a lot of people want to work in institutions and they like the structure, and that's just the type of person they are. A lot of people don't, and they want to be more of an individual brand on the internet.
Well, there's more security. You have your healthcare. You have your have so many advantages to working in institutions that many people want.
Exactly. But what's funny enough, think of it this way: YouTubers who are part of the creator economy, they're able to be YouTubers because it's a big institution behind it that is allowing them to do it. They're essentially Google employees because they technically get money through Google. Yeah. But if you're very independent, you also realize that you could do things like start your own merch brand, start your own online course, do things like that. So I think there's an interdependence. One of them is never going to become obsolete, but both are going to become almost like 50-50 in a way. Now it's more like 90-10. I think it's going to get closer to a 50-50 thing.
I think that's a good way of seeing it, Kosta. How they're going to coexist, and how some people are going to want to be in institutions and who like it, but it's not going to be the only option because of all the benefits that they bring to society and to individuals whom they employ.
Yeah, just the way you said. I think that's a great way to end the podcast. We're a little over time again, but we had so much to say. So I hope this helped someone, or I hope this information was relevant to someone out there.
Yeah, but thanks. It was a good podcast today. No, go ahead. Do the outro.
Well, do you have anything else to add? Any final words?
I think an hour and 4 minutes of us talking is more than enough for anyone to handle.
Well, with that being said, my name is Kosta.
This is Marc.
And thank you all for listening to this episode of the Money Class Podcast. We'll see you again next week with another episode. Bye, everyone.
Take care, guys.
This has been episode 10 of the Money Class Podcast. If you liked the episode, make sure to subscribe and follow the podcast. We release a new episode every week. See you next week. Bye-bye.